I am not, and I have never been into women. I never experimented when I was in college. I never got so drunk I accidentally kissed my female pals, and I never put on a show for my boyfriend as a special treat. But then I met Cheryl. Giggles were the soundtrack to her life. Every time I saw her, she was laughing about some silly thing or another. No one had the right to be happy that much of the time. Whenever I thought of her, and I seem to think of her a lot, I could always hear girly giggles in the background. It was like having voices in my head, except I wasn't mad. She was. There was no reason for any of this. I wasn't into women. And if I ever would be, it wouldn't be for some ginger-haired girl who thought Hello Kitty was the most important thing in her life. Everyone has an inner child, but Cheryl's red-headed child was right in my face. She worked 2 days a week at the office, and every time she came in, she brought sweets to share. When she talked, especially when she stood next to me, all I could smell was butter toffees and caramels. Cheryl's desk was covered in little toys. Her desktop had a picture of a cartoon cat. This girl was untrue. How had she even got the job? What was her interview like? I never used to be so bitter until Cheryl started working here. I felt undermined. All the men in the office would laugh about her juvenile antics, and I began to worry that as the only other woman in the office, I'd get lumped in too. I started to avoid Cheryl. I couldn't stand her constant childishness that made me stiff and awkward and old. And that was it, really. She made me feel old, and I hated her for it. That jolly white girl didn't have a care. I was a working-class black woman. I knew all the hurdles that stood in my path. My life was not all fun and games, and I was serious for good reason. I was making a cup of tea one afternoon when Cheryl came into the kitchen. I sighed, braced myself for another mindless conversation. What's that supposed to be? She poked at my arm at the black snowflake that covered the dark brown skin of my bicep. That's a pretty star. It's a snowflake. I gritted my teeth. She raised an eyebrow and nodded, but then she reached out and stroked a finger across it. I shivered right down to my shoes. Cheryl jerked away at the same time. Now I shuddered, and we looked at each other. But the moment was broken by 2 guys from technical support walking in. I was so grateful for their interruption. I am not into women, I am not into women, I am not into women. And if I was, I wouldn't want to start now. That went double for women who behave like silly little girls. If I avoided Cheryl before, then I was even more elusive after. I refused to believe about the intensity of her touch. I gave my good friend and co-worker Georgia a hand job after work, just to get rid of the memory of her. I am not into women, I'm not into women, I'm not into women. I chanted it until it became my mantra. I'm not into women, but I couldn't stop thinking of her. I'm going to get a tattoo. Cheryl confided in me as I washed my cup in the kitchen sink. I fought the urge to look around and see if she was talking to someone else. She pointed to her hip. I want to have some little roses, right here. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the spot on her skirt where she had indicated. Does it hurt? I counted to 5 before I replied, it hurts like hell. Her pretty face fell, and suddenly I wanted to move heaven and earth to make her smile again. What was happening to me? I'm not into women, I'm not into women, I'm not into women. Will you come with me? What? Will you come with me when I get my tattoo done? I'm a bit nervous about it. I stared at her. Why was she talking to me? I'd done my best to avoid her, never appeared friendly, never laughed along with her stupid behaviour. I was going crazy. I don't do this sort of thing. I never do this sort of thing. I am not into women. I am not into women. I am not into women. Least of all with some laughing girl child. She shoved a huge stack of papers out of the way when Cheryl popped her head around the door. Her face took on a disappointed frown. I'm sorry, I said, I'm snowed under. She smiled and turned away. It was the first time I'd ever known her to be silent. I was so glad she left. My fascination with someone I didn't even like was starting to wear me down. Compared to Cheryl, Giorgio's report was bliss. I didn't see Cheryl again until the next week. I was entering the ladies' toilets and she was coming out. When she saw me, she grabbed my hand and yanked me into the nearest stall. I am not into women, I am not into women, I am not into women. Oh God, she was saying something to me. I did it! She yelped excitedly, shuffling out of her jeans. I couldn't believe what she was doing as I stood dumbly in the cramped space, transfixed at the private striptease I was being treated to. Cheryl giggled constantly as she disrobed, and at one stage she had to pause and take a few deep breaths before she could continue. I was frozen as I tried to remember exactly what it was I wasn't into. Finally, her tight jeans bunched around her knees, and I zeroed in on her white pattern knickers. "Hello, Kitty," winked at me from a dozen different poses. I felt like a dirty old woman. Cheryl pulled the elastic to the side, and that's when I saw her tattoo. A beautiful cluster of red and yellow roses had been etched into her pale skin in a loose bouquet. It was lovely. My fingers reached out, and I drew the tip over flesh that was warm and smooth. I looked up when I heard a hungry gasp, and was surprised when big blue eyes gazed at me. I stepped away feeling ashamed, seedy and sordid. I backed to the door, fumbled with the lock, but Cheryl's hand slammed it shut. "I'm not a child," she breathed huskily. "I never said you were. Where'd all the air gone?" "I want you," she growled dangerously, and I started with fright. I'd heard of sexual predators before, and I'd assumed they're all men. This playful kitty suddenly turned into a lioness. There's no way she could be attracted to me. I was old enough to be her. She kissed me before I could get another word out. But in truth, all I could say was, "I'm not into women." But at that moment, it seemed that was a lie. Her lips were the softest things I'd ever felt. Her tongue was the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. My mantra disappeared as Cheryl kissed me more. "Don't be afraid," she said as she released me. Her hands reached to my blouse. She slipped a finger over the buttons, expertly undoing them. I couldn't move as she reached inside my black bra and expertly cupped a heavy brown breast. She tweaked a nipple so gently I almost sobbed. No one had ever touched me like that before. Why had it taken me so long to get into women? I was approaching 30 and this was my first experience. I wanted to scream with the injustice of it all, but my body had other plans. Every drop of blood in my veins seemed to zoom in on my nipples. I swear I felt them grow an inch. Why would I be afraid of this? It wasn't as if I was being devoured by some beautiful flame-haired creature of the night. Somehow my fingers returned to her tattoo, but this time I slipped inside a band of her stupid knickers and into the hot, wet part of her. My mind knew all the anatomical names for women's genitals. I studied a little biology, and here and now the words seemed cold. Vulva, clitoris, mons and labia. They're clinical words. Cunt. Pussy. Cheryl laughed. "Yeah, that's me." She giggled against my breast, and this time her laughter overtook her, and I joined in too. She pulled away from my tits, leaving them cold and wet, but I didn't care. My fingers were deep inside Cheryl's cunt. I curled my fingers against a special place inside her, and I was suddenly grateful for my biology lessons. The bump above my fingertip meant that I was now massaging her G-spot. The stuttering gasp I heard meant I was doing something very right. I felt her muscles clench and unclench around me, and it was unlike anything I'd ever known. I was now into women. Quite literally so. I continued to work my fingers inside Cheryl, and she sighed when she came, and then she giggled like a child. I somehow knew I'd never get tired of that. Surprisingly strong hands pulled my fingers from her cunt, and she still held up my sticky digits to my face. I faltered for a moment. I got as far as "I am not into" when I stuck my fingers in my mouth, licking and sucking every last trace of her into me. Cheryl smiled and kissed me once more. We swapped spit and her juices, a tangled mess that was anything but childish. "You were right," she whispered against my neck. "That tattoo, it hurt like hell." "Then let me kiss it better?" She stepped back a fraction and I squatted down in a small space. I pressed my lips to her painted rosebud and I licked all over. The sound of giggles rang out once more. I was officially into women, and I knew I'd be getting into this particular woman a lot more from now on. I stifled a chuckle and kept on licking.